Level up your English with Skyrocket English Class. Vocabulary to talk about forecasting. The first word that most people know is to forecast. To forecast is a strong prediction based on evidence. For means before, and we often use the word forecast for things like weather or economics when the data justifies a prediction. For example, based on the data, we forecast our sales next year will be strong. Or, it is impossible to forecast the weather months in advance. Another useful verb, however, that students don't always know is to foresee. To foresee means to try to see into the future. You don't use data to make these predictions. It's more like you're expressing what you feel will happen in the future, like you're looking into a crystal ball. For example, I don't foresee any problems getting this project approved. Or, no one foresaw the pandemic of 2020 and 2021. Foresee can also be made into two useful adjectives. The first of these is foreseeable, which we use in the expression the foreseeable future. For example, we won't take on any more staff for the foreseeable future. Take on is a useful phrasal verb which means to accept work or responsibility or to hire a new employee. Or, another example, it is foreseeable that shops will make more sales through e-commerce in the long term. The second adjective is to be unforeseeable, which speaks about the future you can't see. This is useful because if someone is complaining about something, you could explain that the problem was unforeseeable. For example, the war and the subsequent rise in gas prices was unforeseeable. Or, the problem with our supplier was unforeseeable. More words. Another useful expression is in the long run. In the long run means in the long term. Of course you can use in the long term, but in the long run exists and is frequently used by native speakers. For example, in the long run we will abandon fossil fuel vehicles. Or, in the long run we must reach net zero to prevent a climate catastrophe. The opposite is in the short run, which means in the short term. For example, in the short run, many countries continue to use coal to generate electricity. In the short term, incidentally, can also be made into an adjective, to be short-termist. To be short-termist describes a person who only thinks and plans in the short term. It is used negatively or critically. For example, politicians are often short-termist and think only about winning the next election. In the long run, in the short run, and to be short-termist. Another useful word is Outlook. I know that Outlook is an email software, but it's also a word in English to predict a future situation. This prediction is based on data, and so it is similar to the word forecast. Indeed, the nouns forecast and outlook are often used interchangeably. For example, the outlook for cryptocurrencies in the next year is weak due to low demand from investors. Or, the analyst has a positive outlook on the prospect of this company due to its performance last year. The outlook. Now we come to one of the most interesting words in the vocabulary set, in hindsight. In hindsight means to understand a situation only after it has happened or to look at things retrospectively. It comes from an old word, hind, which means back. This is where the word behind comes from. And so hindsight means to look back. For example, in hindsight, Europe's reliance on Russia for so much of its gas supply was a bad idea. Or, In hindsight, the housing crash of 2008 could have been avoided with more regulation of banks. What is hindsight in your language? Is it a word or is it an expression? Find out on wordreference.com. Next we have a fun expression, to be a long shot. To be a long shot describes an attempt or guess that only has a small possibility of succeeding or being accurate. Personally, I think this comes from basketball, because if you shoot the ball from a long distance, you only have a small possibility of success. So what you're saying with "it's a long shot" is, I'll try and do something, but don't expect it to work. For example, I could try to fix this problem tonight, but it's a long shot. Or, we'll try to set up a meeting for next week, but it's a long shot. To be a long shot. Next, a foregone conclusion. A foregone conclusion describes a result that can be predicted with certainty, using the word "for" again to mean before. For example, the football result was a foregone conclusion when the team scored 4 goals in the first 30 minutes. Or, everyone joins the family business eventually, so it was a foregone conclusion that my brother would join as well. A foregone conclusion. Finally, some more data words. The first of these is insight. An insight describes a deep understanding of something. For example, this data gave us a good insight on consumer trends. Or, the archaeological remains gave historians an insight into the past. Other words include to see an upward or downward trend, which describes an increasing or decreasing tendency or trend. For example, we are seeing an upward trend in young people enrolling in higher education and a downward trend in youngsters starting jobs. Or, we are seeing a downward trend in people watching terrestrial TV, an upward or downward trend. The final word is a trajectory. A trajectory is the path of a curve in a graph, often used to make predictions about the future. For example, we predict from this trajectory that the global population will be 9.2 billion by 2050. Or, the trajectory shows that electric car sales will overtake fossil fuel vehicle sales by 2035. A trajectory. To practice this vocabulary set, why not visit us at skyrocketenglishclass.com, where you will find flashcards and an activity set accompanying this video. Or, for hundreds of real-world expressions, phrasal verbs and vocabulary to help you speak naturally, why not check out our book, Next Level English, 50 Lessons to Improve Your English on Amazon. Back to the video. Part 2. Vocabulary in context. Listen and read about this real-life event to discover how these phrases are used in context. The financial crisis. Despite their teams of data analysts, economists, and strategists, no bank nor major investment fund foresaw the house price crash of 2008. The only people who saw it coming were rogue analysts working outside of major institutions, such as Michael Burry, a hedge fund manager, and Ben Hockett, a solitary stock trader who had abandoned Wall Street to trade derivatives from his home in California. Through careful analysis of mortgage bonds, Burry forecasted an asset bubble in the housing market. This was due to the quantity of high-risk loans being given to people without the resources to pay them back. Burry then used this insight to convince banks such as Goldman Sachs to sell him a new product called a credit default swap. The credit default swap meant that if, or indeed when, borrowers defaulted on these loans, he would be compensated. In hindsight, as we all know, this was a genius idea, and when the housing market bubble finally burst, Burry and those like him made a lot of money. For most people, however, including ordinary families, the housing crash of 2008 had been unforeseeable and devastating. Many were financially ruined, losing their homes, their investments, and savings. In the long run, however, for better or for worse, house prices recovered and have been on an upward trajectory in Europe and the US ever since. With forecasts of a population fall in the coming decades, however, house price growth is not a foregone conclusion, and in the long run, not even the most brilliant analysts can foresee what will happen. If you enjoyed this video, check out the others in the series. Thanks for watching. Catch you next time.